A pilgrimage for Brian Haw, a spiritual journey of relevance, from the ruins of Barking Abbey to Canterbury Cathedral, by Lee D. Miller. That's me. Right, we're on day 5. We've just come along from Boxley to Detling, and just sitting outside of the closed down shop. Right, I recovered my decorum and felt a rumble in my stomach. It was definitely breakfast time, and so I wandered back along the street to join the Pilgrim's Way once again. And I hoped that I may be able to purchase some milk in the pub opposite to the junction of the road. I also cheekily thought that I could maybe even knock on someone's door to explain the situation and see if they had any milk they could spare and maybe even sell me. Would that be okay? I thought it might be worth a try. As I came to the group of houses next to the lane that was the Pilgrim's Way, a lady was going to and from her house and packing her car with horse riding equipment. I thought that this was my opportunity, and anyway, what did I have to lose? Excuse me, I said very politely. I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I wondered if I could ask a question. She looked at me a little inquisitively, and I half wondered if she thought that I was about to ask her for a number and that this was a chat-up line. She was quite an attractive lady, as it happened. What's that then? She inquired. Well, I know this is ever so cheeky of me, but I'm hiking the Pilgrim's Way and haven't been able to find a shop to buy some milk for my breakfast, so I just wondered if you may have a pint to spare that I could buy off of you by any chance. I know it's peculiar, but I'm a bit stuck, I explained. She looked at me, I guess to make a judgment call, and probably in gladness that I wasn't actually asking her out on a date. Then she said that she'd go into the house and have a look. A few minutes later, she reappeared with a pint bottle of Silvertop, which was 2/3 filled with milk, and handed it to me. Oh, thanks ever so much, I exclaimed. How much do you want for it? I asked, while holding out a pound coin. Oh, don't worry, she said. You can have it. Enjoy. It was so nice, and I couldn't believe it, to be fair. I thanked her again and wished her well, and then I set off on my way, this time with a milk bottle in hand. Sorry, I just lost where I was then. Within a few yards, and right at the point where the Pilgrim's Way began again, I stopped. Before me was a very quaint and beautifully historic site. It was a gateway built with red bricks, and it had the aura of being extremely old. I stood for a few moments to admire it, and then I went closer. There was a sign affixed by English Heritage which explained more about the gateway and told of it being of Tudor origin. It said that after the murder of Thomas Becket at Canterbury in 1170, many pilgrims followed in the footsteps of Henry II to the shrine of St Thomas in Canterbury Cathedral. It went on to disclose that there were many resting houses built along the way so that pilgrims could take shelter, and that one probably stood behind the Tudor gateway where it still stands today. It was very interesting, and it was the first undiluted sense of the ancient that I had along the Pilgrim's Way thus far. I really felt in that moment that I was doing something quite extraordinary, that I was following in the footsteps of others, and I had a distinct sensation that I was somehow linked to those others who had walked along the path before me. I almost had the sensation that they were all there with me, and that I was no longer standing there on my own. It's an unusual thing to say, I'll admit, and it's hard to describe the feeling I had, let alone trying to justify it. All I can say is that you'll just have to believe me when I say it. I know that there are some people who are going to argue that the feeling was created by my imagination after I read the English Heritage information, but the thing is, the sensation started before I read the information, and it began the moment I saw the gateway. It certainly had a special feel about it, and you most definitely get the sense of ages gone by. I was surprised that I didn't notice the gateway either when I walked past the lane before, but then again it was out of my line of sight. and I was more focused on the directions the lady had given me for the village shop. After an extended period of time appreciating the Tudor gateway, I set off along the tarmac lane which followed the ancient Pilgrim's Way. I was looking for a nice spot to prepare my breakfast because of the squarely cut hedgerows which lined the lane either side of me. There was nowhere appropriate. I carried on walking with my 2/3 full pint of bottled silver top in my hand, enjoying the sunshine and the fresh air. Every now and then, however, a diesel car would pass by and I was choked by its fumes, which always seems to linger longer than that of petrol engines. It was a pleasant walk along this part of the path, and even though I was walking in a lane and on tarmac, I was really enjoying being on the Pilgrim's Way proper. I was looking forward to the fact that I would be on it for most of the rest of the day. I eventually came across a pub called the Black Horse Inn, and there was a car park with a grass-banked area which looked like a nice place to have my breakfast. I saw that there were picnic tables outside the pub, but seeing as I wasn't buying anything, I didn't feel it would be right to use them. And anyway, I needed to set up my burner on some grass in order to make myself a cup of Earl Grey tea. It was a very late breakfast, and it was probably getting on for 11 o'clock. I was quite hungry by then, but I was enjoying the moment. There were flowers around me and the sun was shining brightly, but it had reached the point of the day where it had become too hot to sit directly in its rays. I relocated and found myself some shade by a signpost and by the side of the lane for the pub and its accommodation. As cars passed, people looked at me as I prepared my tea and muesli, and for the most part I received warm smiles as I returned people's gazes. As I finished my breakfast, I noticed that the pub's kitchen was receiving a delivery, and so I thought I'd take the opportunity to go and ask the kitchen hands for a refill of my water bottles. I packed all of my stuff up and went over to ask. They were very friendly and did so with the least amount of fuss, and I enjoyed a little bit of banter with them as I did so. I then looked at a map and saw that the lane followed the Pilgrim's Way for quite a distance and near to a village called Lenham. The village was a mile or so off the path, but I thought that would be the best place to head for in order to have lunch and refill my water bottles again later. It was turning into another very hot day, and I knew that I had to be careful not to run out. With that decided, I pressed on once more and went to enjoy the beautifully quaint and green Kent countryside as I observed it from the long winding lane I was walking along. I eventually reached the junction for the turn off to Lenham, and I had to decide whether to make the effort to go there or not. I consulted the map and saw that a town called Charing was another 3 or 4 miles further on, and seeing as I still had about 2 litres of water left, I decided that the round trip off the path to Lenham and back wasn't worth it. My celebrities, which had touched upon C-list status at the beginning of the day, were now making a bit of a populist comeback and had regained the not so lofty heights of B-list status once more. All out for Charing, I thought. Now, the next section of the Pilgrim's Way is given a break from the imposition of tarmac roads and heads quite naturally and upon its own steam along a path that is reasonably straight and flat. For some parts of the section between Lenham and Charing, it feels as if it's not changed one iota, not in just the past few centuries, but for over a millennia. Put quite simply, some parts feel like they have stayed the same for a time immemorial. It felt very ancient and extremely enchanting. I have to say that it was this part of the Pilgrim's Way and this particular section of the entire pilgrimage on which I'd walked, all the way from the ruins of Barking Abbey to Canterbury Cathedral, that I felt was the most special. It was exceptional, everything about it. It was, and it fulfilled every notion, every image and every dream you could ever imagine about what pilgrimage was once like, and how the path must have looked and felt like to pilgrims in the days of Chaucer and beyond. It gave a magical feeling because it was quite simply magical. For some parts of the Pilgrim's Way along this section, the path takes the form of a track made from earth and stone and is of a winding equal to that of a horse carriage. and its width equal to that of a horse carriage. Trees align both sides with mixtures of oak, hawthorn, beech and hazel. A canopy is formed in the middle, sheltering you from the sun and the wind and the rain and the stars. Gaps appear so that you may briefly see upon the heavens, or you may just take in the momentary panoramic views of the fields and hills around you. Although the line of trees is sparse, looking along and in front of you, it gives the impression of a forest, and you feel like you are venturing through woodland. At any moment you expect to see one woodsman ambling along in his medieval peasant's wear, or a horse-drawn wagon coming from the opposite direction. You feel as though you're in fairyland, in a time in between times, because time feels like it no longer exists. This is how I feel I can best describe it, but there was something else too. As I walked along parts of this section, the sensation that I experienced when I was at the Tudor Gateway was magnified immeasurably. It's hard to describe, and it's harder to make it sound believable, but as I walked, I had the feeling that I was not walking alone. I felt there were others walking with me too, not just a few, but dozens. I couldn't see them, and I couldn't hear them, but I could feel them. Just across the veil of time, walking with me, even conversing. It was ever so peculiar, but it felt real to me. I could feel their presence in another time, but in the same place. It's the truth. Go and experience it for yourself. Feel it. The path continued to give me the sensation of the ancient, and I had visions of the Green Man. The trees themselves even gave the impression of being consciously alive, and I wondered if they themselves took walks along the path in the deepest of night. The whole ambience reminded me of scenes from Lord of the Rings, and the impressions I had felt very real. What I've just... Right, I've got ... here, and in brackets. What I've just written is the truth of my experience. That's what I just said, isn't it, man? During that point of my pilgrimage, and it's up to you if you choose to believe it. It matters not to me. All that matters to me is that I convey the truth of what I experienced as accurately as I can, and as honestly as I am able to do so. I do not desire to convince you of anything. I just wish to give you the benefit of my experience, because that is my truth, and it is for you to discover your own. I just said that, didn't I? I'm reading this straight off. The whole of this book I'm just reading straight off. Wow. ... I finally reached the point where I could turn off to Charing, and I gazed upon a high pasture which looked open to public access, with paths embedded within its grasslands. I departed from the shade of the tree canopy which the Pilgrim's Way offered, and entered into the sunshine and the meadow, so that I could take a direct path across to a road and a roundabout whereupon the town of Charing began. My water bottles were empty by that time, and I really needed a refill. I also needed some supplies, and I hoped that there was a shop in Charing that was open. As I followed the road into town, I enjoyed the ambience. It appeared to be a very charming place, and there was red, white and blue ticker tape hanging from the rafters of the buildings all the way across and along the high street. I wasn't sure if it had been put up in celebration of some event, or if it was just there for decoration. Either way, it helped to give me the impression that Charing was a very quintessentially English place. I found a small mini-market that was open and purchased some supplies. I considered buying a gallon bottle of mineral water, but the price was a bit over the odds, and so I opted to get some water elsewhere. As I left the shop and headed further down the street to explore, I noticed a little vehicle entrance into a residential car park garage area, and saw a woman by the back of her house who was speaking on a mobile phone. I thought that I may as well go and ask for a water top-up, and so I walked over to do so. She seemed to be a very pleasant woman, and after I'd approached her, I waited for her to finish her conversation on the phone. She didn't wait to finish her conversation herself, however, and in mid-dialogue she asked what it was I wanted. To begin with, I apologised for disturbing her, but then I explained my water situation and lack of it, and asked if it was possible for a refill. She looked at me while continuing to talk on the phone, and then pointed to her outside tap, indicating that I could use it. And when we both looked at the tap, it was clear that it was a bit grubby from garden use, and I wasn't particularly hygienic to gain drinking water from it. She then hand signalled an apology to me while still talking on the phone, explaining to a friend that she now had a backpacker with her. And then she signed for me for the bottles. And then she signed for me to give her my bottles. She took them off of me, walked into her kitchen while still talking to her friend on the phone, had it on the shoulder like that, went over to the sink and refilled my bottles one at a time while continuing to talk and with much dialogue on the phone. After she had finished filling the bottles, the conversation with her friend finally ended and she hung up and put the phone down. She then picked up all my water bottles and walked across her kitchen to return the filled bottles to me. I expressed my gratitude and she said that it was fine because her son sometimes backpacked and so she was glad that she could help. And just like that, and with no questions asked, I went on my way. Job done. Where else on earth would something like that happen? I love England so much, honestly. It's just so civilised and so nice, and just people just helping you out while I'm in the middle of their lives. Oh, I just love it. Of course it happens around the world as well, but anyway. It was around 6 o'clock in the evening and I was quite tired by that point, so I wandered over to the parish church and discovered a little green where I found a nice bench to rest and refresh myself. The sun was still warm and I enjoyed the moment sitting there, staying for almost an hour while listening to my radio. It was at this point I heard, announced on the radio news, that on Friday the 1st of July, Essex County Cricket Club were playing Kent County Cricket Club in a floodlit 2020 match in Canterbury. What were the odds, I thought, and I consulted my map to see how much farther I had to walk in order to gauge the time that would take me to reach Canterbury from where I was. I figured that Friday would indeed be my estimated day of arrival, and I wondered about going to see the game after that evening. That'd be great, I thought. I'd never seen Essex play at cricket before, and the fact that they were playing Kent made it a local derby. I wondered if Miriam would be up for going too if I saw her, and then I thought about what I was going to do to meet her in Canterbury when I got there. I generally don't live life that is planned, and before I left Barking I had only told her that I was walking to Canterbury, and I didn't give any dates or times of arrival because I didn't know them. We'd only been in touch by email as I didn't have a mobile phone, and all I knew was the place in which she worked, the farmers market in Canterbury. She had let me know by email that she was due to leave Canterbury to hike across Dartmoor with her boyfriend on Saturday the 2nd of July, but that any time I turned up before then would be fine and that I would have a place to stay when I arrived. I didn't actually know where she lived or the times that she worked, but just thought that if I was meant to meet her at the end of my pilgrimage, then I would do so, and if I wasn't, then I wouldn't. Life was pretty simple to me like that. But the great thing was, if I wasn't lucky enough to bump into her, I felt like now I had a backup plan. I could go to the cricket match and I might even be able to hitch a lift back to Essex from there. I was sure that there would be plenty of people from Essex at the match, and they would all have to return home to buy the Dartford Tunnel. Some may even be heading towards Barking, who knew? But it was definitely a plan. Happy in the knowledge of my unexpected development, I gathered my belongings and referred to my map, setting off on the path to rejoin the Pilgrim's Way once more. It was a beautiful evening as I walked out of Charing and entered the fields beyond. As I traversed across a public path through the middle of a farmer's crop field, I gained a slight elevation. I turned to absorb the wondrous view that was seen back towards Charing. The air was crystal clear and the sunshine bathed the landscape, revealing its vibrant colours in all of its natural glory. It was truly captivating, and I didn't wish to leave the spot on which I was standing. Eventually, and reluctantly, I turned to walk and join the Pilgrim's Way proper again, continuing on my way. Sorry about that, got a bit of it. It was very lovely. It was a very lovely walk. along the next section of the track. So to the south I was bordered by fields and to the north by woodland, and this enabled the evening sunshine to continually immerse me with its warmth in its fading light. I was in campsite search mode, but nowhere seemed to appeal as I walked. I consulted my map and noticed the ruins of a church somewhere in the distance. Something attracted me to it, and I thought that would be an appropriate place to head for. But it was 2 or 3 miles away, and I felt it was too far for me to reach before nightfall. It was already going on for 9 o'clock in the evening by then. I persevered in my attempt to find a campsite as soon as possible, but the further I walked, the longer into the evening I ventured, and the less light there was as dusk began to take hold. The sun had finally departed for another day, and as the air became cooler, I began to walk faster. I was actually starting to become a little bit desperate. There seemed to be no spots along the path which appeared to be suitable, and then I came upon an area of land where the Pilgrim's Way went through, which had numerous signs informing me that it was private land and to not leave the public right of way. The owners were obviously quite guarded about the possibility of trespassers. I carried on, passing through some beautiful wheat or barley fields, and came across a small woodland isolated in the middle of some fields, Skeets Wood. I found a little bit of grassland area by the side of the path, and thought that this had to be it. It wasn't ideal, and there was the same "this is private land" signs in existence all around me. But the light was fading fast, and I had to be quick in order to pitch my tent. I stopped, took off my backpack and unpacked my tent. I then began to erect it, but the lay of the land was terrible, with lumps everywhere, and it was very exposed. Can't be having this, I thought. And then I aborted the implementation of my evening routine. I packed everything back up and headed off on my way again, annoyed at myself for just wasting another 10 minutes of the last dregs of daylight. My unmentionables, which after my rest in Charing had been back to C-list celebrity status, had now found their way back into the realms of the B-list once more. Because of the hammering they were taking as I ventured at pace along the path, they were starting to feel very aggravated again, but I had no choice and had to ignore them as I carried on. Just as I came out onto the other side of the woodland area, I saw the silhouette of a church tower a little further ahead into the distance. Is that the ruined church? I thought to myself, and then I consulted my map to check. It was. Blimey, I thought, I ain't done bad time. A beautiful barley field laid out before me, and the path meandered through it, almost giving me the sense of it being the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz. We're off to see the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Here he is, the wizard, if ever a wizard was, I sang to myself as I gingerly skipped along the winding path, knowing that the end of my day was finally in sight. I came to a stile at the end of the path and by the edge of a field, and because it was isolated with no fence or hedge attached, I walked around it and saw the ruined church. I saw another sign saying that I was on a private estate called Eastwell, and it explained the rights of access, or rather, the lack of them. Bugger, I thought. Whoever owns the land isn't going to take too kindly to me staying here for tonight. I walked a very short distance along the roadway to find a path that cut across a small enclosure and a natural-looking field, which headed towards the grounds of the ruined church. The field looked perfect, and although it was exposed to the roadway, I thought that this was me for the night. I couldn't walk any further, and it appeared to be so quiet where I was. It was past 10 o'clock, and I deduced that it was so late into the evening that I shouldn't be disturbed on this night, and if I left first thing in the morning, then no one would be any the wiser for me being there. I immediately set in motion my evening routine, pitching my tent directly to the pathway, but not blocking it because it was across an open field, and began to settle in for the night. I enjoyed my food and took my shower before snuggling into bed as the stars began to appear in the night sky. It was a beautiful spot I'd found, and I could see the silhouette of the church tower outlined above the trees in front of me. After taking a glimpse of the church, and because of the proximity of the old churchyard to where I was camping, I ever so stupidly gave a "woo." The only thing was, because I was there all alone. I ended up really scaring myself. I was such a muppet. I quickly zipped up my tent and lied perfectly still, waiting to hear the slightest noise in the silence. And when I did hear a noise, I thought, what was that? I quickly unzipped the tent again and poked my head out. Remember doing it. Outside and have a quick butcher's look around. I examined the dark and ghostly shadows created by the dense tree canopy that surrounded the church, and then I saw, deep in one of the darkest shadows, absolutely nothing at all. God blimey, this was going to be a long night, I thought to myself, and then I put my head onto my pillow and I couldn't help but fall asleep. Right, that was that day. Not sure how this has come out, but anyway, thank you, Brian. God bless.